Hi, I'm James McGuire, and our topic today is how a technology will change society in the years ahead. To talk about that, I'm joined by Tim O'Reilly, founder of O'Reilly Media and author of the soon-to-be-released book, WTF, What's the Future and Why It's Up to Us. Hi, Tim. How are you doing today?
I'm great.
Good. And I like the fact that you've changed the acronym WTF to something fresh. You know, what's the future instead of what it might have been in the past?
Well, one of the things is WTF can be an expression of astonishment or an expression of dismay.
Right.
I think, that's really what I play off in the book. When we think about the future, do we think about it with astonishment or dismay? And how do we get from one to the other? Mm-hmm. When we do technology right, the WTF of astonishment turns into, hey, this is just great. It's everyday, life is good.
Right.
But we have a lot of fear right now, and we're getting more and more of the WTF of dismay about some of the new technology that's coming in. And the real key line in the title is, it's up to us, whether we get the WTF of astonishment and delight or the WTF of dismay.
Right. And it's hopeful to think it is up to us.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the artificial intelligence and how that relates to the job market. There's a certain amount of debate going on. There's some people think that AI will actually displace workers. Others are more optimistic. I know that earlier this year that the financial firm BlackRock laid off 40 analysts and they replaced them with algorithms. And I know earlier this week I was in Newark Airport in New Jersey, and a certain amount of clerks and service people had lost their jobs due to this self-service automated system. So it does seem like AI and automation is eroding some jobs, but are you more optimistic about AI and the job market than that?
Well, I have two separate thoughts about it. And the first one is that history teaches us that technology tends not to eliminate jobs, it displaces them, or eliminates some and creates new ones. There's a famous work by James Besson on the introduction of the ATM. Where it turns out that because it made branches cheaper, they actually ended up creating more branches, more local branches, and hiring more tellers who delivered, not the service of just handing you out cash, but selling up higher services. So we end up with more people employed. Right. More recently, we see that in the last 3 years, Amazon has added 45,000 robots into their warehouses, and they've added hundreds of thousands of workers in their warehouses, not to mention all the people who are doing package delivery, many of whom don't work directly for Amazon.
Right.
The reason is because it's expanding their services. And that leads me to this sort of fundamental design pattern of technology, which is it's the solution to problems. And it lets us do more, So yes, when the weavers of Ned Ludd's time were put out of work, the hand weavers, we made more cloth. Mm-hmm. We made, we kind of brought in fashion for ordinary people, so that the person who had one suit of homespun for the year ended up in a few generations, having as many, the variety of clothing and changing clothing, according to fashion, just like the very, very rich people. Right. And so, the question is, as we have these new cognitive technologies that make us more productive, they will enable new kinds of work. And the reason that they don't always do that more quickly, there are several reasons. One is it takes time to figure out how to apply a new technology. I mean, just look at the World Wide Web. It's been around for, basically better part of 20 years. And we're really only now, first of all, you can see how in the beginning, everybody was focused on all the jobs it was taking away. And then we started seeing all the jobs it was creating, new jobs.
Right. It certainly has been a net job creator, the web has.
That's right. And I think AI will also be a net job creator. And I think there's sort of an interesting design pattern. Well, first of all, so the way I sort of deal with this in my book is really around the question of, these are systems that do what we tell them to do. And And so the question ultimately is, what are we telling them to do? And I think there is way too much focus in the early days of a new market on disruption, on eliminating costs. I was talking with one leading AI researcher and also an investor, and he was telling me about how he was investing in a startup that would eliminate 30% of call center jobs.
Oh, okay.
And I said to him, you know, call centers aren't that good. You know, the service isn't that good. Why are you talking about just about eliminating the jobs rather than making them better? You know, because that's kind of going back to Amazon and package delivery. That's what's made them so amazingly successful, is they went, oh, we're not just going to, you know, do the same thing more cheaply. We're going to do more. You know, hey, we used to give you 2-day free shipping, then 1-day free shipping, then same-day free shipping. And they're kicking the butts of their competition because they understand that this is like a superpower that lets you do more than you could do before, not just let you do the old thing more cheaply.
You know what my concern is, and this relates to the idea of, you know, income inequality and the future of technology, is that there certainly will be jobs. I mean, AI certainly will create jobs. I think it's almost inarguable. But I think a lot of those jobs that it will create will require skills. I don't think it's going to create unskilled jobs. It's going to create jobs that require education. So that's my worry, is that some of the workers now that are taking unskilled jobs will never be in a position to really get skills, or I want them to be. I wish we had a better system for that, but I'm concerned that we do not.
Yeah, again, I would have to say that I believe that the narrative of skilled versus unskilled jobs is a very self-serving narrative by a particular class of people. You know, you take a you know, a Wall Street analyst and try to get him or her you know, to work in a fast food joint. They'd actually probably do a pretty lousy job,
right?
You know, and it kind of goes back to this economist James Besson wrote a wonderful book called Learning by Doing, and he studied the mills in Lowell, Massachusetts in the 1840s. And one of the things that he did was look at how long it took an old hand weaver to become fully productive, as shown by their wages, you know, the amount of money they were able to earn, versus how long it took one of the supposedly unskilled factory workers. And it turned out it took them each about the same amount of time, i.e. about a year, before they were fully productive. And he said they weren't you know, replacing skilled workers with unskilled workers. You were replacing skilled workers with differently skilled workers. And so the issue is not skilled versus unskilled. It's what are the skills that need to be taught, because we always have to teach people new skills. And I think the biggest change is not that these are going to be unskilled jobs versus skilled jobs. It's that we have to actually rethink how people acquire skills. And how continuously they acquire skills, that you can't just get them once and be done.
Well, yeah, I totally agree that some of those jobs are difficult. But if you think about skilled versus unskilled and going into the future with technology, say, I'm going to learn how to be a waiter, and that can be very tough. It's not easy to be a good waiter. I was a waiter in my college years.
Yeah, me too. I was terrible at it.
I was actually pretty good, but it wasn't easy, and it took me a while. But then again, if I think about how long it would take me to learn, you know, Java programming, to be a master Java programmer, I could learn to be a pretty good waiter in about 6 months. I don't think I could learn to be a master Java programmer or a master data scientist in 6 months. That's probably a 2 to 4 year program, meaning it's going to be harder to train workers into the future. Am I missing something here?
No, well, there are offsetting opportunities. Now, again, you know, there's kind of a question of how do we allocate the wages. But one of the things that I try to deconstruct in my book some of the technology platforms of today and say, what did they teach us about the fundamental design patterns and rules of this coming economy? And one of the things, if you look at, for example, Uber and Lyft as an example of here's technology meeting the real world.
Right.
You see humans managed, brought into this network platform. The humans are managed by algorithms, which are going to get smarter and smarter, and the humans are just providing, you know, some of the work. But those are augmented workers. They're cognitively augmented workers. You know, the skill that it used to take to become a taxi driver, which is you had to learn your way around, and you had to be pretty good. You had to be able to get from any place to any, you know, you look at the knowledge, the London taxi cab driver test. You literally have to be a human GPS. They give you 2 arbitrary points in the city, and you have to recite, you know, out loud the turn by turn to get there. You know, it's like unbelievably cognitively demanding. And now you have these applications that simply tell people where to go. And so the people are being upskilled by technology. So some of the things that are hard today are easier. And even programming is easier today. You know, there was a time when the early programmers, basically their interface was a bank of switches, and they were entering programs by flicking switches to enter binary codes. You know, that was way harder than writing a little bit of PHP or whatever, you know. So I think that technology can actually, you know, make jobs that currently are hard require less skill. And in fact, there's been some interesting conversations and work about the idea that coding, for example, might become a blue-collar skill. Because there's a lot of coding that you can, in fact, learn in 6 months. That's very useful. And the other thing that I guess I would say is that the kinds of jobs that we have to understand, you know, maybe part of our future may require different kinds of skills. So when you think about, you know, AI routinizing, you know, being an analyst at a bank or whatever, or, you know, or some of the clerical stuff in an airline, you know, that's machine work. But think about being a good teacher. Think about being a good caregiver. These are things that we actually don't value very highly, and maybe we should be valuing them more highly. You know, think about being a good, you know, I don't know. I think about somebody who makes specialty coffee. There's some really interesting early signs of how, you know, technology changes the game in unexpected ways. One of my favorite things that I learned recently by listening to Alexis Madrigal's Containers podcast, which is an 8-part series about container shipping. Was something about the way the coffee market has changed. His episode 4 is about coffee. And if you think about container shipping, it kind of led to, you know, the elimination of all these longshoreman jobs. You know, 40 some years ago, 30, 40 years ago. It was really kind of in the 80s. They mostly went away as you moved to this much more automated way. That led to an era of, you know, vast bulk imports of products and bulk products. And what happens, though, again and again in the economy, and I first saw this in open source software, and, you know, why did open source software lead to the rise of big data? That was sort of where I, you know, kind of made my story about Web 2.0 and big data. It was like, the idea was that when one thing becomes a commodity, something else becomes valuable. So here's Alexis telling the story of, you know, a local Emeryville coffee roaster and how they get their, you know, coffee beans through you know, an importer. And it's completely changed because now they are getting single origin coffee from some particular plantation in Guatemala or Sri Lanka or both. It's coming in this vast, you know, container network, but it's now coming out to these specialty roasters.
Humans, not machines.
Humans. And it's not just the jobs for the humans who are saying, yeah, you know, we make our particular coffee from this particular plantation, you know, so you've got differentiation on both ends, both the roaster. But it turns out that because of that differentiation, which people are willing to pay more for, you now have to unpack the containers in a different way.
Aha. Okay.
Because you're not getting full container loads of a commodity product anymore.
So
Somebody's going, okay,
work then.
yeah, it's coming in a container, but now there's these vast warehouses where, guess what? It looks a lot more like the old longshoreman work, where people are taking individual sacks of coffee, onto pallets and routing them into trucks, because a truckload is no longer, wow, you have a full container and it just goes bang to one place. It's like it comes in a container, and the container from Guatemala has to be broken into, and then the container from Sri Lanka, and it all gets broken up, and the folks who are at a particular coffee roaster are getting their mixed, truckload. And it's just such a really good metaphor for how, the creative economy writ large, which is humans adding value to commodity products, which, in this case is a physical product, adds value. People are willing to pay more for it.
Well, and I like your optimism about the human element. I hope you're right about that. What about the question of the haves and the have-nots? Obviously, we're in a period of serious income inequality. It's only getting worse. And it seems like, the workers of the future, to keep up, will certainly need ever more training. What do you see as the role of technology in that have versus have-nots picture going forward?
Well, I guess the key idea that I wrestle with is, I come around in the book to income inequality, and it's not a product of technology. It's a product of relative power, and it's a product of the rules that support the relative power of workers versus capital, for example.
Right.
And if you think about, say, the Middle Ages, there was this huge power imbalance where some people were very rich, they owned the land, and other people had to work for them. And there were the kings.
Middle class, right.
And we actually had a story about the divine right of kings, that it was just meant to be this way.
Right.
And we have a story like that about capital right now, the divine right of capital. And we'll look back on that one day as we look back on the divine right of kings. Because the fact is, you've got a set of people. Capital is actually abundant right now. It's not the limiting factor.
We overthrew kings. Are we going to overthrow capital the way they overthrew kings?
Well, I think that's a real risk. Andy McAfee, the author, the co-author of The Second Machine Age and Machine Platform Crowd, said to me over breakfast one day, we were talking about people worried about AI taking over the world. And he said, the people will rise up before the machines do.
Okay.
and we're already seeing that in our politics, and it's going to get worse. So, I've been actually saying this, and people like Nick Hanauer have been saying this for some years. Nick Hanauer was like, the pitchforks are going to come for you guys. And it's like, you look back on something like the French Revolution and you say, couldn't they see it coming? And the answer is no, they can't see it coming. And I think we have to wake up, because the only sustainable society is one that is where the fruits of our productivity are shared more widely. Right. You have basically a situation that we've built and engineered. It's literally an engineered system. It's not a natural market condition that has actually tilted the rules, relentlessly in favor of capital owners over the last 40 years. If you look back, and again, these are things that I talk about in the book. If you look back after World War II, in that golden age of economic shared prosperity that everybody looks back to as if it was some kind of anomaly. Right. Sure, there were certain factors that were exogenous shocks, where we were having to rebuild after the war, and that, but there was also a key idea. They had looked at what happened after World War I, which was a lot of people out of work, which led, particularly in Germany, to the rise of Nazism. And they went, holy cow, when after World War II, we're going to do it differently. And so they really focused, I talk a little bit about how every algorithmic system has its objective function or its fitness function. that you're trying to optimize for. And that optimization for 30 years was keep people working. And it wasn't actually until the 70s and 80s that we said, actually, we don't need to do that anymore. And we switched to saying, well, if we optimize for shareholders, everything will be good. And we're reaching the end of that optimization where we're going, actually, just like the too much optimization for workers led to these abuses in the labor movement. It led to what they call cost push inflation. There were problems with it, but we went too far in the other direction.
Right.
And now we've got a situation with like 2009, where well, actually, it was really through the 2006, 2007, where the people who are already making boatloads of money, in the finance industry, created crappy products that take even more money out of the system.
Yeah,
and
just financial.
now, you've got people like, Carl Icahn, who are holding Apple hostage, or
Right.
Trian Partners holding GE hostage, to basically, instead of investing in their business, instead of giving more money to workers in the form of higher wages, which is sort of an option, why couldn't Apple pay people in its stores more? I mean, this notion that, low wages are somehow required by the market.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, there are times when a company can't afford to pay more. But you look at this company; they've got so much money. And it's like, actually, across our economy, there's billions of dollars being spent every year by companies on share buybacks,
right,
which are simply designed to drive up the stock price and improve the returns for shareholders.
Right.
And if you actually had a different set of incentives, rather than saying to management, you're going to make more money because you're mostly paid in stock, so do things to pump the stock, you would probably have a situation a little bit more like we see in Germany, where there's a more balanced view of all the stakeholders in the business,
right,
and the benefits of increased productivity are allocated more fairly. And I think we have to look deeply at the way that we have tilted the rules, such that, for example, the financial industry, with 4% of employment, takes out 25% of all corporate profits.
Right.
And they're taxed on those profits through various loopholes at a far lower rate than people who are doing things in the real economy and that create real jobs.
And I guess that brings you to, what we as people can do. I guess my last question is, we see these macro trends, AI, big data, cloud, financial maneuvering, technology. Like, what can the individual do in the face of these large macro trends that are changing society right now?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to realize, we have to stop buying into the idea of the macro trends. Because the macro trends, some of them are real. Like a macro trend that is real and inescapable is the Earth is warming.
Right.
The population is growing. The population in various countries is aging. Right.
Right.
These are real macro trends. The macro trend that machines can do more of the work, and that means that companies can make themselves more profitable and have to pay people less. That's not a macro trend. That's a macro choice.
Right.
And I think we have to, the first thing that people can do is start recognizing, stop buying the narrative that says a particular economic theory is like a law of physics. It isn't. We have to be able to distinguish the things that are really, I guess I liken the economy to a game. I'm fond of basketball.
Okay.
And guess what? There are laws of physics there too.
Sure.
Right? There are real laws of physics, that influence the game. But there are also human rules. And we have to start by disentangling those two. I open my book with this sort of metaphor of maps, because we draw maps of the world and we live in those maps. And the extent to which those maps are correct, we can progress. The extent to which those maps are wrong, we can go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing we have to do is correct our own maps. And then we have to correct our politics as a result of that. And I think, what's really tough is that right now we're in a situation where the politics, you have people who are sort of harnessing people's sense, that something is wrong. You've got the WTF on both the right and the left, the WTF of dismay and disgust. And it's being misdirected by, populists who really aren't trying to change the system. They're just kind of trying to harness that anger.
Right.
And I think we have to actually harness that energy and really change the system. And we have to look and ask ourselves, what is unthinkable? And that's, again, another lesson from technology. And I talk about this in my book. I had this back in 2000. I remember, Jeff Bezos had sued Barnes & Noble over the one-click patent, and everybody said it was obvious.
Right.
And then when we really looked at it, we actually put out a bounty for prior art. There was no prior art.
Oh.
It was really hard to find because it was obvious only in retrospect. And you see the same thing actually with something like Uber. There were connected taxi cabs before Uber,
right.
But nobody had actually done this magical thing of putting all the pieces together so that you could just put out your smartphone and a car would come get you.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like that's totally obvious, except it wasn't.
There
were people who were chipping away at the idea, but all the pieces hadn't come together. And I think in the same way, we're at the beginning of, rethinking our economy, rethinking so many things. And we have to let go of the idea that the future will be this inevitable outgrowth of the past, that the same people will be in power, that the same rules will be in play. And we have to be willing to think the unthinkable and kind of go, oh yeah, actually, yeah, we could do it really differently. And if you look at the great moments in history, look at the New Deal, the history of the New Deal is amazing. They were, it's like they totally changed the rules.
Right.
And I think we're heading up to a time when we're going to have to not just nip around the edges, but totally change the rules.
Create a new platform.
Yeah, and I look at the Democratic Party. They're kind of intellectually bankrupt, and they're struggling despite all of the crazy stuff that's going on the other side, because they're kind of just trying to well, we just want to get back to the status quo, as it was before, and that's wrong. We actually have to go forward. The status quo is not worth protecting. We have to invent a new future that it makes. First of all, identifies correctly the hard problems that we need to solve as a society. Secondly, correctly identifies what are the opportunities of the future. And I think it's implied by that coffee roasting story. It has a new view of the role of platforms like container shipping, or like Amazon, or like Google, or like Facebook, and the ecosystem that they support. And how do we get companies, how do we get society to say, oh, okay, we actually have to use these great world-spanning platforms, not as a way of extracting value from small businesses and from individuals, but as a way of creating value for for smaller businesses and for individuals, so that we can have a robust circular economy, local economy, where people are exchanging things with each other. Because if we let those platforms become extractive, the platforms themselves will eventually fail.
Tim, I think you said it's a lot of good stuff. I want to mention the book one more time. It's WTF, What's the Future and Why It's Up to Us. When is it going to be released?
It's going to be out October 10th and October 17th in the UK. Okay. And you can pre-order it now, though, on Amazon or at any other site that's up there.
Good luck with it. And thanks for talking with us today.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.